Hello, my name is Roy Poyan, and I am the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I want to thank you today for joining us for Fentanyl and Families in Harm's Way. This episode, we're going to review the stages of recovery. And what we're identifying in the stages of recovery are how this disease progresses from its initial to it being a substance use disorder. There are actually 7 stages to that. And for you to know what stage you're in is very important, because then you have an idea as to what types of services or what type of care plan you need to be seeing placed into this person's life so that they can mitigate or change the trajectory of their path in it getting worse. Let's take a look at some of those. They're in your study guide, and I won't go through each one of them in detail because we'll do that at the family table. But initiation is one of the first stages, and that's pretty obvious. They take it for the first time. Then they kind of feel that they'd like to experiment more, so experimentation is the next stage of they tried it again. And then they move into regular use. Now they like what they're doing. Remember what we talked about with the dopamine, the reward system, and the memory? All of that's starting to harden more. And then what we're working with is problem and risky use. So now their usage is becoming much more problematic, and their actual vulnerability to risky behavior, exposure to diseases, exposure to crime, both that they're participating in and crime that's placed on them, and then dependence. And now that whole syndrome of the disease brain really takes hold. And now it's a substance use disorder. Now remember back when we talked about the DMS-5, that has categorically behaviors that a person, a clinician can look at and say, yes, these 3 are exhibited, therefore it is that diagnosis. And then remember from our other seminar, you've got a diagnosis, do you have a stage, and do you have a care plan? And does the care plan move as the stages move? So this, in terms of its regular use, is applicable. It doesn't mean that these 7 stages happen and you didn't notice them. Hopefully we're heightening your awareness and you would notice them. And if you're on the incline here, you have a chance to intervene. But that may not be the case. You may already be at stage 7 with the substance use disorder. So what we're going to do is we're going to take time to identify how the disease progresses in terms of its usage. And then that will give us an idea as to where we are and what we should be asking for and expecting in services. You know, this takes time and to understand. And it's going to combine a couple of different aspects, because from this we're going to talk about the relapse, which is a reoccurrence of what this is, which is the addiction in terms of its uptick. So let's go to the family table and sit down together. You're experiencing a certain type, and we need to identify how you will take this information and use it to your family's advantage. Come and join us. Thank you for joining us at the family table. We've got some exciting topics to talk about, and that is that we know what's going to happen next. And that's quite a statement to make, we realize. But there has been a lot of good science placed behind this type of disease that we can confidently say that many of the areas that you will find yourself in, we know about. And it is not necessarily assured that it'll happen a certain way or in a certain sequence, but then again, it's not a surprise either. So helping you to understand that substance use disorders progresses in stages is a real value, especially when we can sit there and say, well, what are those stages and what should they look like? What should we expect and how can we prepare to respond? Because that's the purpose of this shared knowledge with you as a family. So let's take a look at the study guide and identify some of the characteristics of the stages of the progression in terms of substance use disorders. And in so doing, we're going to first identify that the disease progresses in about 7 stages, and that's what we know and have learned through these studies. And it typically starts, as a recreational use. And often we also see it starts from a clinical medical use. Pain medications are provided after surgery or an injury, and through basically mismanagement, or it may be biological, and addiction is then formed. So, but there is an initiation in either regards to when the drug starts or when the alcohol starts. And then what we find is that that progresses in many cases into more of an experimentation. It's not like we're challenging ourselves in experimentation, but we are still inquisitive as to will this pleasure be the same as it was the last time we remembered using it? And then what we find as we progress in experimentation, that we're getting comfortable with the idea that we're going to use this more than we maybe originally realized, but we're okay with that. So we're calling that the 3rd stage, and that's titled regular use. So we kind of like maybe involved it in our reasoning and logic that we're accepting this as being a part of our life or our routine, or this is how we handle stress, we do this. And then we're also then moving into the progression of, now we realize that it's a problem. It's stage 4. But because the reward system and memory are working so actively, the fact that it's a problem with reason, logic, and judgment seems to start to be overridden. You know, I realize it's a problem, but I'm facing this stress, and this provides me with so much relief. And then you go back to, so I'm going to use it again and have an expectation it'll do for me in the same way it did for me last time or the last few times. So now all of a sudden we're using this on a regular basis, even though we know it's risky, that we could be becoming more addicted or problematic, but we're not quite sure in terms of coping skills individually what we can do about it. And so in the lack of that, we're now starting to find ourselves that this is becoming a problem. And by problem, we mean it's interfering in the courses of our life, decisions, relationships, and physical health, mental health. And we know that addiction, it may be on the horizon. So then in the 5th stage, we're at the stage of what they call dependency. Now we're more or less dependent on getting this kind of result from using this particular substance. And now we're more or less saying to ourselves, I really do need it. And even though in stage 4, we had become accustomed to telling ourselves, it's creating problems for me and it's risky that I continue. But now I'm telling myself, that doesn't matter and I really do need it. So that could also be from the fact that they've actually experienced what it was like to not have it. And in which case they know a little bit about, or maybe a lot about, what it's like to detox or go through withdrawal, which is incredibly painful. It's a miserable, miserable experience. Your whole body rejects you, and in very physical ways, it's painful and mentally troubling, and digestive tract, all your systems are involved. So with that in mind, your dependency might be also kind of the avoidance of, I have to take this in order that I don't experience, withdrawal. So now you're at stage 6, where it's a full-blown substance use disorder. Let's go through some of the characteristics of that. You cannot face life. You cannot control your use. You continue to use despite harm that it comes to your health and your life. You lie about your use, especially how much you're using. You avoid friends and family. You start to isolate. You've given up on activities that you used to enjoy. And now you cannot recognize the problems with your behavior or with your relationships or with others. Meaning, in a cognitive way, you're not able to sit there and say, hey, this is really creating a disruption in my life. And then tell yourself, I don't like it. And then tell yourself, for that reason I don't like it, I'm not going to do it. That's gone. Okay. So with that in mind, now the seventh one is treatment. It's either treatment or you're going to have an overdose that results in death. So most people, just so you know, most people achieve treatment, and an overwhelming majority achieve recovery. And of those, an even overwhelming more majority achieve lifelong recovery. We hear in the news about all the deaths, and that's terrible, no question about it. That's just the tip of the iceberg, because most people do not die of this. There's a huge population that's using it that goes unrecorded because it's difficult to capture that information and data. But the fact is, we know this to be true. You know, if we're seeing 100,000, then there's many, many more that are using it and not overdosing, but they're in the other stages, and those stages are, you know, progressing, because this does progress as a disease. So what we want to do now is to take our workbook and take a closer look at, well, so what does this mean in terms of the impact to the family? And that's what the workbook does for us in each of these episodes. And we've got a good review in the workbook for this particular episode. So take the time to go through it. It's going to talk about binging and intoxication and withdrawal and the negative effects of detoxing and the preoccupation and the anticipation. These are all behaviors of impulsivity and positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement and compulsivity, so that you can start to become familiar with what exactly are we doing. Well, we're adjusting to make treatment more appropriate. We're looking to engage in the early stages. So what we're doing is we're providing treatment for them in stage 7, but and they could jump. They could jump from 1 to stage 5 or 6. They don't necessarily have to have long time spans in the in-between numbers in terms of the stages of progression. But what we're doing in treatment, in responding to this, we're conditioning the client with early treatment and therapeutic strategies in the early treatment, and we're providing leadership to help guide them. And then in the middle stages of treatment, okay, we're starting to introduce a different kind of modality for them in terms of conditioning them in the middle stages. So it's very purposeful how treatment is provided in terms of getting them back on track to what would be a chronic disease management of this ongoing. So we break up these stages of progression. And then we've got certain types of ways of dealing with the late treatment. And what we've done in the workbook is we've given these to you so that you can better understand, okay, you so often you hear somebody say, well, he's been through treatment. And somebody might say, oh, that's nice. And we really don't take the time to say, so what does that mean? He's been through treatment. It's kind of like, so what? Does that mean he showed up to something and they just sat around and swapped stories, or was there something productive used with the time that they were together? And was the treatment purposeful and meaningful to the specific stage of their recovery? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. Yes, they do get together and they swap stories. Yes, they do have meaningful modules that are oriented towards their specific stage of treatment and their specific stage of a care plan that is based off of the stages of progression of the disease. So we wanted to bring your awareness around to, so what is that? Because we deserve to know. We're the consumers and we're the family. We love this person. And that's provided for you in the workbook as you start to go through the different stages of treatment. And so then what we'll find is there's a video being offered. And once again, these videos are just outstanding. In some cases, they're 5 minutes, and in some cases, they're 30 minutes. But in either way, take the time to take a look. And you could Google this yourself. You can go on YouTube, and in their search field, you could type in the 3 stages of disease progression for substance use disorder, or the 3 stages of, the 7 stages of treatment for substance use disorder. And you'll get like 17 different videos that you could spend time on, and they're extremely helpful. So with that in mind, we want to take time to then say, well, so what are we going to do in terms of the coping skills? Well, in terms of the coping skills, there's always, in every stage, something that the family needs to determine a solution that's relative to their current situation, which is relative to what stage the disease is progressing for them. So once again, we're going back to the idea that we're a case management company. Yes, that's correct. In the sense that you're coordinating care and you're advocating for them and you're basically getting in front because now you know what's coming next and you possibly will have the ability to financially support the next step, or maybe they have become healed enough that they're in an employment situation and they have benefits, but they may not fully understand, and you can help them to understand that these certain characteristics are what's seen in treatment plans, and you can ask the professionals, so where are we in the treatment plan and their plan of care, and how well are we doing? And somebody might sit there and say, well, he's doing fine. He goes to work, he's able to go to the grocery store, he cooks for himself, he's doing just fine. And the answer is no, wait a second, stop. This is a chronic disease. So don't ever accept the idea that they're doing fine. Rejoice that they're doing well and live in that moment. But at the same time, let's be realistic. This is a chronic disease. And because it's not going away, we need to have somewhat of an optic on what's the care plan, what did the last reassessment tell us, and what should we be paying attention to. Now, we're not using this as a bat to punish them with. We're using this as a warm blanket to wrap them in, one of love and caring and empathy, because we're walking this pattern with them. But now we know that the family is progressing with this disease. And the thought is, now wait a second, he's the one or she's the one with the problem, not us. And the answer is, no, you're a family system. What they're experiencing, you're experiencing. And for that reason, you need to be aware that this moves through in stages as a progression, and also the treatment that's provided moves through in stages, and that each stage in the treatment has a specific role that is oriented to that stage of the progression of the disease. I think this is really encouraging news for all of us, that all of this information is available for us to understand. And in doing so, we want to make sure that you get the right level of care. That is so critically important. If you're in talking to a group that has really no understanding of this specific issue, then number one, you're wasting your time and their time. But number two, they may suggest something that takes up your time, money, and resources on an area that doesn't offer you much value. It has nothing to do, let's say, with the stage of the progression you're in, okay? They may be suggesting something that would be typically related to the earlier stage. You're in the middle stage, and now you're looking towards the possibility of going to the late stage in terms of, well, then that should have changed the care plan. I realize that it's very confusing, but when you start to break it down into a timeline, it's very helpful. When you start to take the timeline and break it down into progression of disease moving forward, it's very helpful. Will the disease always move forward? No. It could move backwards. It could stay the same. But the fact is, through a reassessment, you'll be able to kind of know. And so will your providers that are participating with you. The providers are going to love the fact that you know a lot, and that you're learning, and that you're constantly growing in your learning, and that you're trying to be a positive influence in creating the environment that's needed for lifelong recovery. They're going to like that about you. But here's the other flip side of that. They're not used to you knowing anything. They're used to families coming in and saying, here, fix it. Let us know when you're done. And what the families don't realize is it will never be fixed. It's a chronic disease. You'll learn to manage it, but no one person is ever going to fix it. Just like the fact, because this is a timeline and different services are being provided, and sometimes and most often by different kind of categories of, we talked about the fact that the community agencies might be providing something, and mental health is providing something, and medical is providing something. So you're feeding off a lot of different categories. That in itself requires you to be very knowledgeable of a lot of things, but that's unrealistic. And that's why having just a general idea on most of these things, to be able to ask the right person to help you find the right resource, and for the right resource to then help you find the right level of service, that's going to be where all of this knowledge comes into your advantage. So take the time to do the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution, develop a decision, and design a plan of action before you go into the marketplace looking for those that can assist you for the stages of progression of the disease that you are currently in, or those that you're getting ready for that are possibly on the horizon that you could see will be coming up next. I want to thank you for taking the time to review this episode. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically. can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved, and then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen. The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The 3 questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the 4th category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The 3 questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the 5th category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being, required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these 3 questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is. And now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your 5th sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go back using a model for creating a solution. For any issue in life you have to face, you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine what are our values. Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decisions you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is, what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number one factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. Your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be, somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. Is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then, do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then, would you do this would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry, on all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made, based on the solution that you know you want to use, are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action. And we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.